My name is Carol. I'm 54 years old, and I've lived a life full of challenges, but I wouldn't change a thing. I am a mother. No, I was a mother first and foremost, and everything else has followed from that. My daughter Emma is 27 now, a young woman on the verge of a new chapter, and I, at 54, am still her protector, her guide, the one person who has always been there. It wasn't always easy, of course. Nothing about raising Emma was easy. I was 27 when I had her, just a child myself. Her father, Scott, had been there for the first few months, but then he left. I never expected him to stay. I had hoped, of course, but when reality hit, it didn't surprise me. We didn't have a perfect marriage. I could feel that something was missing. The love wasn't there, not in the way it should have been, and that's why I didn't fight for it to stay. After Scott left, I was left to figure everything out alone. There were months where I struggled to make ends meet, working 2 or 3 jobs to keep us afloat. But somehow, we made it work, and I think Emma understood. She saw the sacrifices I made, the late nights, the days spent juggling work and home. I never wanted her to feel the weight of it, but she grew up strong because of it. She became my anchor in those dark times. Years passed. Emma grew into the beautiful, strong-willed woman standing at the cusp of a new life. And as much as I wanted to hold on to my little girl forever, I knew this day was coming, the day she would leave me, in a way, and start her own life with someone else. I had been preparing for this wedding day for the last year. I wasn't going to let my own emotions ruin it. This was her day, not mine. We had planned everything together, every detail meticulously arranged. The venue, a large open garden at the family house, a white tent with delicate lace trim glistening under the bright spring sky. The flowers were a delicate mix of roses and peonies, Emma's favorite. The cake, a 3-tiered masterpiece, carefully crafted to look like a wedding dress, was ready to be served to the guests who would fill the garden. I had already begun to envision walking Emma down the aisle. The thought made my heart swell with a mixture of pride and a quiet ache. I had spent so many years imagining this moment, and now it was here. I would be walking beside her, holding her hand, watching her make the next step into adulthood with a man who was supposed to love her the way I had loved her, unconditionally. And then there was Stephen, her fiancé, the man she had been talking about for the last year, the man she had decided she would marry. I didn't know much about him. Emma hadn't talked about him a lot at first. I met him once, a few months ago, at a family gathering. He was polite, well-mannered, handsome, in a quiet way. But there was something off, a subtle feeling that I couldn't quite put my finger on. He seemed too perfect, if that makes sense. The kind of man who says all the right things, who knows how to play the role, but whose eyes don't quite meet yours with the honesty you expect. Still, I had hoped that my suspicions were misplaced. Emma was an adult. She had chosen him, and I had to trust her judgment. As much as I wanted to protect her from the world, I couldn't do that forever. She had to learn, just as I had, that the world wasn't perfect, that people weren't perfect. But today, something didn't feel right. I woke up early, as I always did on the day of a big event, heart racing with nerves and excitement. The house was buzzing with activity. My best friend, Nancy, was already there helping with last-minute details. The caterers were setting up their stations outside, and the flower girls and ring bearers were being dressed and primped, ready for their big moment. But even in the midst of all the activity, a quiet tension gnawed at my insides. The feeling I had when I first met Stephen had never quite gone away. I had pushed it aside, tried to ignore it, but today it felt heavier than ever. Maybe it was just pre-wedding jitters, or maybe, deep down, I knew something I wasn't willing to admit yet. And that's when she arrived. Laura, my sister. I hadn't seen Laura in 15 years. 15 long years of silence, of avoidance, of painful distance. We used to be close. Too close, maybe. We were best friends when we were younger, but that all changed when she married. Him. The man who tore our family apart. The man who destroyed my sister's life. And now she was back, standing on the doorstep of my house, ready to watch her niece walk down the aisle. When I saw her, I froze. The years had not been kind to her. Her face was drawn, her eyes hollow. But there was something else, a sharpness in her gaze, a warning in the way she looked at me. She looked different than I remembered, more fragile in some ways, but there was still that fierceness in her. Carol, she said, her voice strained as though she was afraid of my reaction. Laura, I replied, barely able to hide the shock in my voice. I didn't know whether to hug her or to send her away. So, instead, I simply stood there, rooted to the ground. I came to see Emma, she said quietly. But first, I need to talk to you. I nodded, letting her inside. We sat in the living room, a strange distance between us despite the years we had spent as sisters. After a few minutes of strained silence, Laura spoke, her words coming slowly, as though she were choosing them carefully. Your future son-in-law, she said, her voice wavering just slightly. His name is Stephen, right? I nodded. Yes, that's right. Why? Laura's face turned pale, as though a shadow had crossed it. She stood up abruptly, pacing across the room. I thought so, she murmured, her voice distant. I need to warn you. I blinked, not fully understanding. Warn me? About what? She stopped pacing and turned to face me, her eyes full of an emotion I couldn't quite place. Carol, that man, he's not who you think he is. He's dangerous. I shook my head, confused. What are you talking about? But before she could say more, she turned, walking out of the room, leaving me with nothing but a sinking feeling in my stomach. Something wasn't right, and now I couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. I stood there for a long moment, watching Laura's retreating figure as she disappeared into the house. Her words echoed in my mind like a dull thud, each one sinking deeper, gnawing at the edges of my thoughts. He's dangerous. What did she mean by that? How could a man who was supposed to marry my daughter, my baby, be dangerous? But there was something in the way she said it, something in the look in her eyes. She wasn't just making a casual comment. No, she was warning me. She was trying to tell me something that I wasn't ready to hear. I could see that much clearly. I thought about calling Emma, asking her about Stephen, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. I didn't want to sound paranoid. I didn't want to ruin this day for her. She'd been looking forward to this wedding for so long, and I couldn't shake the feeling that Laura's return had somehow triggered this deep, uneasy sense of something being terribly wrong. Instead, I decided to ignore it, push it out of my mind. I had a wedding to prepare for, but every step I took seemed heavier than the last. I could feel my stomach churn with a persistent knot of anxiety, something that I hadn't felt in a long time. I forced myself to focus on the preparations. Emma's dress was ready, hanging in the room across the hall. The wedding planner was making last-minute adjustments to the tent outside, and I could hear the murmur of excited guests as they arrived. But I couldn't shake the thought of Laura and her warning. I knew I had to talk to her, to find out more, but I didn't want to do it right now, not today. I made my way to the kitchen, where the rest of the family was preparing last-minute snacks for the guests. My mind kept drifting back to Laura, and the more I thought about her words, the more unsettled I became. My heart was racing now, and I couldn't keep my thoughts from spiraling. What did she mean? What was the connection between her and Stephen? I had to find out. I excused myself from the kitchen and made my way to the back of the house, to the old study I had always kept locked. There, tucked away in a drawer, were old family albums, letters from years ago, and bits of forgotten history, things I had put away over time and never revisited. I don't know why I suddenly felt compelled to look through it all, but I needed something, anything to give me answers. My fingers trembled as I pulled open the drawer and sifted through the contents. Most of it was old photos from family vacations and birthdays, some notes from Emma's early school years. Then, in the back, hidden beneath a few faded letters, was an envelope. The handwriting on it was unfamiliar, but when I saw the name written on the front, my heart stopped. Stephen. I opened the envelope with shaking hands. Inside was a series of letters and a photograph. The letters were dated 16 years ago, before Emma had even been born. I recognized the handwriting immediately. It was Laura's. I stared at the letters for a long time before I could bring myself to read them. The words blurred in front of me, my vision swimming, but I forced myself to focus. It was a love letter, one of many, from Stephen to Laura. I read through them, feeling a coldness creep up my spine as I saw how deeply involved they had been, how deeply he had been involved with her, long before Emma had even met him. As I flipped through the letters, my hands grew unsteady. The words were familiar in a way that made my heart ache. He had written to Laura about their future, about how they would be together forever. He had promised her the world. But then the tone shifted. I stopped when I came to a page marked with a date, 16 years ago. The letter was the last one he'd written to her. He had been apologizing, telling her how sorry he was for what had happened between them, how it had ended abruptly, without explanation, how she had spiraled into a deep depression, something I had never known the full extent of until now. I stared at the photograph that had fallen out from the letters, a picture of Stephen and Laura smiling together on a beach. Laura's eyes were filled with hope, a light that now felt like a distant memory. Stephen looked the same, charming, disarming, his eyes the same ones that had met mine when I first shook his hand, the eyes that had seemed so innocent. But the letters told a different story. I closed my eyes and tried to steady my breath. This wasn't just the man Emma was about to marry. This was the man who had destroyed my sister's life, the man who had walked away when things got tough, leaving Laura broken, lost in a sea of depression. He had been her first love. He had promised her the world, and when she lost their baby, he had disappeared without a trace, and now he was going to be my son-in-law. The thought made me feel physically sick. I had to act. I had to protect my daughter. But how could I tell her? How could I expose Stephen for what he truly was without ruining everything? How could I destroy her dream of this perfect wedding, of this perfect life with the man she believed loved her? The room spun as I thought of the delicate line I had to walk. How much of the truth could I tell? And how much could I leave unsaid? The truth could ruin everything, but not telling her the truth would destroy her in the long run. I didn't know how much time I had. I had to make a decision, and I had to make it fast. My mind raced, my heart pounding in my chest. The wedding was hours away, and everything felt like it was slipping out of my control. I needed to speak to Laura again. I needed to confront her. But for now, I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let Emma marry him. Not if I could stop it. The weight of the letters still pressed heavily on my chest as I stood in the small study, surrounded by the remnants of old family memories. The photograph of Stephen and Laura stared back at me, an innocuous image that now felt like a cruel mockery. I wanted to scream, to shout at the injustice of it all. How could he have done this to her? How could he have done this to me, to my family, and now to my daughter? I stood there for a long time, my mind spinning with conflicting thoughts and emotions. I knew what I had to do, but how could I do it without destroying my daughter's happiness? How could I rip away the illusion of this perfect wedding without breaking her heart in the process? Suddenly, I was snapped out of my daze by the sound of footsteps approaching the door. My heart skipped a beat. I didn't want anyone to see me like this, not with the evidence of what Stephen had done to Laura still fresh in my hands. I quickly shoved the letters back into the drawer and closed it, trying to steady my breath. When the door creaked open, I turned to see Emma standing there, her face a picture of excitement and anticipation. "Mom?" she asked softly, her voice laced with concern. "Are you okay?" I looked at her, and for a moment I felt like I was seeing her for the first time. My little girl, all grown up, standing there in her wedding dress, ready to take this next step in her life. She looked so beautiful, so hopeful, but there was a shadow in my heart that I couldn't shake. I smiled, though it felt strained. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just a little pre-wedding nerves, I guess." She smiled, her eyes shining with the kind of joy that only a bride can have on her wedding day. "I can't believe it's finally happening, Mom. I'm so happy. I can't wait to walk down the aisle with you. I've dreamed about this moment my whole life." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. She had dreamed about this moment. She had dreamed about her perfect wedding, her perfect life with Stephen. And here I was, holding the truth that could shatter everything. "I'm proud of you, Emma," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "So proud." She beamed at me, her hands nervously adjusting her veil. "Are you sure you're okay? You look a little distant." I forced a smile, though my insides felt like they were being torn apart. I couldn't let her see my fear. I couldn't let her see what I was really thinking. "I'm just overwhelmed," I said, my voice wavering slightly. "It's a big day, that's all." She nodded, seeming to accept my answer. "Well, I just wanted to check on you before everything starts. I'm so happy you're here, Mom. You've always been there for me, through everything." Her words made my heart ache. She had no idea how true that was. I had been there for her through everything. Through her childhood, through her first heartbreaks, through the struggles I'd faced as a single mother. I had done my best to protect her from the world, to give her a life better than the one I had. And now, this. I wanted to protect her from Stephen. I wanted to tell her everything, how he had hurt Laura, how he had disappeared when things got tough, how he was nothing but a selfish manipulator. But I couldn't. I couldn't destroy her joy, her excitement, not when she was so close to the altar, not when she had already set her heart on him. But I couldn't let her marry him. I couldn't let her walk down that aisle to a man who had already shattered another woman's life. I couldn't stand by and watch her make the same mistakes. "I'm going to go check on the rest of the preparations," Emma said, giving me one last, lingering smile before she turned to leave the room. I watched her go, my heart breaking. I wasn't sure if I was doing the right thing anymore. But I knew one thing. I couldn't let Stephen destroy her the way he had destroyed Laura. I wouldn't let it happen. I looked down at the dress hanging on the hook beside me. The dress Emma would wear when she walked down the aisle. The dress that was supposed to symbolize her future, her new beginning. But what future would she have with a man like Stephen? The truth was a weight I could no longer carry alone. I needed to expose him. I needed to stop the wedding before it was too late. I stood up, my mind made up. I would have to speak out. The longer I waited, the more it felt like I was betraying Emma. But if I let her go through with this, if I let her marry him without knowing the truth, I would be betraying her in the worst way possible. I walked out of the room, the nerves creeping back into my stomach. I had no idea how I was going to do this, but I knew it had to be done. This wasn't just about me or Emma anymore. It was about saving her, even if she hated me for it. I didn't want to cause a scene. I didn't want to be the one who ruined her perfect day. But if exposing Stephen was the only way to protect her, then that was what I would do, even if it meant destroying everything. I knew what I had to do next, and there was no turning back. I stood in the garden, my hands trembling as I touched the edge of the microphone, the smooth metal cold under my fingers. The sun was beginning to set, casting a soft golden glow over the tent where the guests were gathered. The white chairs lined up in perfect rows, the floral arrangements that Emma had spent months planning, the soft hum of quiet conversations. Everything felt so perfect. Everything except for what lay at the heart of it all. Emma was back in the dressing room with her bridesmaids, probably practicing her steps for the aisle. I couldn't stop thinking about how excited she had been this morning, how proud she had looked as she slipped into her gown. Her eyes had sparkled with joy, and I had fought hard to mask my own unease, to hide the fear that had been gnawing at me ever since I found out who her fiancé truly was. And now, here I was, standing at the edge of her perfect day, teetering between the role I had always dreamed of, walking my daughter down the aisle, and the unbearable weight of the truth that could destroy everything. I could still hear her voice in my head. Are you proud of me? I had been proud. I was proud. I was proud of the woman she had become. She was smart, beautiful, determined. She had been through so much, yet here she was, standing on the cusp of a new life. But how could I let her walk down that aisle to Stephen? How could I let her marry a man who had destroyed Laura? How could I let her make the same mistakes? My throat tightened as the realization hit me again. She was about to make the biggest mistake of her life. I wasn't sure if she would ever forgive me for what I was about to do, but I couldn't let her go through with it. I couldn't let her marry someone who would rip her world apart the way he had ripped Laura's apart. I had to protect her, no matter the cost. A deep, painful knot formed in my chest as I thought about my sister, Laura, the woman who had once been my best friend, my confidant, the woman who had suffered at the hands of the man who was now going to be my son-in-law. I had spent years trying to pick up the pieces of her broken heart, trying to help her heal from what Stephen had done to her. How could I let that man into our family? How could I let him destroy my daughter the same way? I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to steady my breath, trying to control the storm that was building inside me. The pain of remembering Laura's heartbreak was like an open wound that would never heal. I could still see her eyes, empty, lost, when she told me about what Stephen had done to her, how he had promised her the world, then disappeared when she needed him most, how he had left her alone to deal with the grief of losing a child, how he had shattered her sense of self-worth, leaving her broken and afraid to trust again. Laura had spent years in therapy, trying to put herself back together. I had spent years picking up the pieces of her broken spirit. And now, Stephen was going to walk into our lives again, this time as a part of our family. But it wasn't just Laura I was worried about. It was Emma. I could still see her, standing there in the dressing room, looking so radiant, so full of hope for her future with him. How could I tell her the truth? How could I break her heart like this? How could I shatter the dreams she had built around him? I knew what I had to do, but that didn't make it any easier. The truth was a knife in my heart, a burden I couldn't bear. If I kept quiet, I would be complicit in her pain. If I spoke out, I would risk losing her forever. But if I didn't speak, I would never forgive myself. I was a mother, and my job, above all else, was to protect my daughter. I had raised her on my own. I had watched her grow, watched her fall, watched her rise. I had always been there for her, through every struggle, every heartbreak, and now, when it mattered most, I had to do the hardest thing I had ever done in my life. I had to protect her from herself. The pain was almost unbearable, but I steadied myself. I was walking into the lion's den. The wedding guests were gathering in the tent, waiting for the ceremony to begin. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as I took a few deep breaths. I had made the decision. There would be no turning back now. As I walked toward the front of the tent, I tried to keep my composure. I didn't want to collapse. I didn't want to show weakness. But my mind was spinning. My legs felt like they were made of lead. My thoughts were racing, filled with images of Laura, of Emma, of Stephen. I caught a glimpse of him standing near the altar, talking to a few of the guests. He looked so calm, so confident. He had no idea what was coming. I stepped into the middle of the tent, and everything went silent. The chatter died down. All eyes turned to me. Stephen smiled at me, his teeth gleaming in the soft sunlight. I couldn't help the way my stomach churned at the sight of him. "Carol," he said, his voice smooth, "are we ready to get this show on the road?" I nodded stiffly, trying to force a smile. "We are. But before we do, I'd like to say a few words." The room went even quieter. Stephen's smile faltered slightly, but he didn't interrupt me. The guests exchanged glances, sensing that something was amiss. I took the microphone, my hands trembling. "I want to thank you all for being here today to celebrate Emma's wedding," I began, my voice a little shaky, but I steadied myself. It's been a long time coming, and I couldn't be more proud of my daughter. I paused, looking out over the crowd, trying to hold my composure. Emma was waiting inside, her excitement palpable. She had no idea what I was about to say. "But there's something important I need to share with all of you," I said, the words heavy in my chest. "Something you need to know about the man who is about to marry my daughter." I saw Stephen's eyes widen just slightly, a flicker of discomfort passing over his face. He opened his mouth, probably to protest, but I didn't give him the chance. I continued, my voice steadying. 16 years ago, my sister Laura was in love with Stephen. He promised her everything, and then, when she lost a child, when she needed him most, he disappeared. I could see the color drain from Stephen's face. The crowd was quiet, waiting for me to go on. "Stephen left her alone to pick up the pieces of her shattered heart," I said, looking directly at him. "He erased the past, pretended it never happened. But I know the truth. I know who he really is." I reached into my purse and pulled out the photograph, the letters. I held them up for everyone to see. "Emma," I said softly, turning toward my daughter's chair, "you can marry him, but now you know the truth." The silence in the tent was deafening. Stephen's eyes were wild with panic now, his calm demeanor shattered. He stepped toward me, his hands outstretched as if to stop me, but I wasn't finished. Not yet. "Look at him, everyone," I said, my voice louder now. "This is the man who would have been your son-in-law, the man who destroyed my family, who destroyed Laura, and now he wants to do the same to my daughter." I could see the guests' eyes shift, some looking away in discomfort, others whispering. Stephen stood frozen, unable to move, unable to speak. I let the silence hang in the air, the weight of my words sinking in. "Emma," I repeated, my voice trembling with emotion, "you deserve better than this. I can't let you marry him." And then, the moment I had been dreading, the moment that would change everything, arrived. I turned back to Stephen. "The wedding is over." And with that, I ended it all. The moment I spoke those words, everything seemed to collapse. The murmur of voices, the shocked gasps, the sudden tension that gripped the air, it all felt like an earthquake tearing through the calm of the event. I felt like I was standing in the eye of a storm, watching the world around me spin out of control. The guests were staring, some with wide eyes, others whispering frantically. Emma was still in the dressing room, unaware of the chaos unfolding outside. Stephen's face had gone pale. The arrogance he had worn so confidently just moments before completely evaporated. He looked like a man caught in the headlights, frozen in disbelief. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him, almost. But then I remembered everything he had done. The years of lies, the destruction of my sister's life, the cruelty he had shown her when she needed him most. No, I couldn't feel sorry for him. Not after everything. I stood tall, the microphone still clutched in my hand like a weapon, feeling a mixture of pride and dread. I had done it. The truth was out, and I knew it would hurt Emma, but I also knew that it was the only way to save her. You think you can just erase the past? I said, my voice steady, though my heart was pounding. You think you can just walk into this family like nothing happened? You don't get to have a clean slate, not after what you did. Stephen opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. He was shaking, his lips moving in frustration, but he couldn't seem to form words. The man who had once controlled the narrative, who had lied and manipulated his way through life, was now powerless in front of me. I could hear his breath quicken, his panic rising, but I wasn't done yet. "You've done enough damage, Stephen," I said, taking a slow step forward. "And now I'm going to make sure the truth is heard. Everywhere. You'll never be able to run from what you've done." I turned away from him and addressed the guests, who were still in stunned silence. "I'm sorry, everyone," I said, my voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "But this wedding can't happen. Not today. Not with him. I know you all came to celebrate, but you deserve the truth, and I couldn't live with myself if I didn't speak up." I took another step toward Stephen, who was now visibly sweating, his eyes darting between me and the guests. "You might have fooled everyone else," I continued, my tone cold, "but not me, not Emma, not anymore." The silence in the room was deafening. Stephen's eyes were wide now, his hands trembling. His mind was clearly racing, trying to think of a way out of this, but there was no escape. The damage was done. He could no longer hide behind his lies. A sudden realization hit me. This wasn't just about protecting Emma. It was about justice, about the years I had spent watching my sister wither, watching her suffer. She had never asked for this. She had never deserved it. But Stephen had taken so much from her, and now I was going to make sure he never had the chance to do it again. And that was when I saw it, the look of defeat in Stephen's eyes. He wasn't going to fight back. He wasn't going to defend himself. All the power he once held over me, over Laura, over everyone in this room, was gone. He slumped forward, his shoulders sagging in a way that made him seem smaller. He had been so sure of himself, so certain that he could control everything. But now he was nothing, and it felt good. It felt right. But there was still one more thing I needed to do. Turning back to the guests, I saw the faces of some of the people I had known for years. Family, friends, acquaintances, people who had supported me and Emma through everything. They were all staring at me, their expressions a mix of confusion and curiosity. They wanted answers. They needed answers. "Everyone," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "I need you to understand that I did this because I love my daughter, because she deserves the truth. Stephen isn't the man you think he is. He's a liar, a manipulator, and today I'm taking away the last bit of control he has over us." I paused for a moment, gathering my thoughts. Stephen destroyed my sister. He destroyed my family. He doesn't get to destroy Emma, too. With that, I turned toward the side of the tent, where I had seen a few of my closest friends standing. I needed them to hear what was coming next. They needed to be ready for what was about to unfold. And then I saw Emma standing at the entrance of the tent. Her eyes locked onto mine, and for a moment, everything in the world seemed to stop. She was frozen, her expression one of complete confusion. "Mom?" she called out softly, her voice trembling. "What's going on?" I felt a lump form in my throat, and for a split second, I wanted to run to her, to take her in my arms and tell her that everything would be okay. But I couldn't. I couldn't protect her from this. Not anymore. "Emma," I said softly, my voice thick with emotion. "I'm sorry. I didn't want to ruin your day, but I had to tell you the truth." She took a few cautious steps toward me, her eyes flickering between Stephen and me. Her brow furrowed as she looked at the man who had once been the love of her life, and then back to me. "What truth?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. I stepped forward, my heart aching as I looked into her eyes. "The man you're about to marry is not who you think he is. He's hurt people, Emma. He's hurt your aunt. He's hurt our family." Her face paled, her mouth opening slightly as the realization hit her. She shook her head, stepping back in disbelief. "No," she whispered, "you're lying." "I wish I were," I replied softly, "but I'm not. You deserve better than this, honey. You deserve the truth." For a moment, I thought she was going to turn away, to run back inside and refuse to listen. But then something shifted in her eyes. Something broke. She looked at Stephen, and then she looked at me again, her eyes filled with hurt and confusion. I I don't know what to believe." "Believe me," I said quietly, "because I'm telling you this, because I love you, because I'm trying to protect you." The pain in her eyes was almost unbearable. It was like I was watching the dream she had built for herself crumble in front of her, and I knew deep down that there was no going back now. The truth had been revealed, and everything would change. Stephen's face twisted in anger, his hands clenching at his sides. He had been quiet up until now, but I could see the fury building in him. He wasn't used to being exposed. He wasn't used to being powerless. "You have no idea what you're doing," he spat, his voice low and dangerous. "You think this is going to make everything better? You think this is going to protect her?" I took a step forward, my gaze hardening. "Number. But it's going to protect her from you." And with that, the last piece of his empire began to crumble. The lie he had built his life on was over, and Emma, though devastated, would begin to heal. Her path ahead would be painful, but it was hers to walk. And I would be there, every step of the way, helping her rebuild what had been broken. It was time for revenge, and nothing at all, could stop me now. In the weeks that followed, everything changed. The fallout from the wedding disaster was far-reaching, affecting not only Stephen and Emma, but also the lives of those who had been caught in the crossfire. For me, the days that followed were a blur. One long string of phone calls, meetings, and interviews with family and friends who all wanted to know the full story. The rumors were swirling, and some people didn't know who to believe. Some supported me, some supported Stephen, and a few even blamed Emma for what had happened. But amidst all the noise, there was one thing I knew for sure. I had done the right thing. I wasn't sure if Emma truly understood everything yet. Her pain was still raw, still fresh, and she hadn't fully processed all the pieces of the puzzle. But she was beginning to see it, beginning to understand the man she had almost married, and the more she understood, the more her anger began to grow. Her eyes, once clouded with love and trust for Stephen, now glinted with the hard edge of betrayal. And in that reflection, I saw the woman she would become, stronger, wiser, and determined never to be a victim again. Stephen, on the other hand, was falling apart. The small, perfect world he had created was collapsing like a house of cards. The truth of his past, the lies, the manipulations, were out in the open. People who had once admired him now turned their backs, and the few who stood by him did so with doubt in their eyes. Emma had called off the wedding, of course, but the damage went beyond that. His reputation, his career, everything he had built was in ruins. And that was only the beginning. I didn't hear from Stephen for several days after the wedding, but I knew he was stewing, trying to figure out how to make his next move. It didn't take long before he made his grand reappearance, through the press, of course. He released a statement claiming that he had been misunderstood, that I had orchestrated everything out of malice. But it was too little, too late. People had already seen the truth, and no amount of damage control could fix what had been broken. Meanwhile, I focused on rebuilding my relationship with Emma. It wasn't easy. She was angry at me for making such a dramatic scene, for pulling her into the mess of her own past. But I understood. She had been blindsided, and in the whirlwind of her emotions, it was hard for her to understand why I had acted the way I had. "I'm sorry," I said one evening as we sat in her apartment, the silence between us heavy with the weight of everything that had happened. "I didn't want to hurt you, but I couldn't stand by and let him do this to you." "I know," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know. It's just, it's all so much. I don't even know who I am anymore, who I was, who I trusted." I reached out, gently placing my hand over hers. "You'll figure it out, and I'll be here, every step of the way." She nodded, her eyes glistening with tears. "I don't know if I'll ever trust anyone the same way again. I don't know if I'll ever look at love the same way again." "You will," I said firmly, squeezing her hand. "You're stronger than you think, and you'll find love again when you're ready." The road ahead for Emma was going to be a long one. She had to rediscover herself, to reclaim the life that had been shattered by Stephen's lies. But I knew she would do it. I knew she had the strength within her, and I would be right there beside her, every step of the way. As for Stephen, I knew he would eventually crawl back into his hole, licking his wounds, trying to rebuild what he could of his life. But there would always be a stain on his reputation. He could never fully erase the truth. And that, to me, was the sweetest form of revenge. I didn't need to destroy him completely. Life had already done that, and I had played my part, exposing the monster for what he truly was. No more lies, no more manipulation, just the cold, hard truth. For now, I could rest easy, knowing that I had done everything I could to protect Emma. And that, in the end, was enough.